Halloween has come and gone. An impressive number of trick-or-treaters knocked on my door. My wife pulled out all the stops with decorations and sweets, and even my 2-year-old had a Halloween party. All of this put me in the mood to watch something nice and gothic, and with the release of a legacy sequel to Beetlejuice hitting the big screen, it seemed like the perfect time to refresh my memory of the first Beetlejuice film before I watched the new one. So, without further ado, here is my review of 1988's Beetlejuice. The film opens with a long establishing shot, the camera gliding over what appears to be the picturesque tiny village of Winter River, Connecticut, where the film takes place, eventually landing on the house of our main characters, only for the audience to finally realise that we're actually watching a model of the village, just in time for a huge spider to appear and climb over the house. I like this opening sequence a lot. Not only does it introduce us to the model village that will be integral to many of the film's later scenes, but, to me at least, the sequence hints at how each of the film's main characters will perceive the real house and the village. The initial view of the beautiful village gives us the perspective of Barbara and Adam Maitland, our protagonists, a happy young married couple who see the village as a tranquil and idyllic place to build a life for themselves. The moment when we suddenly realise the village is a model gives us the perspective of Charles Dietz, the burnt-out but enterprising property developer who buys the house when the young couple dies and become ghosts doomed to inhabit it indefinitely. He moves into the house with his wife Delia and daughter Lydia, and he sees the village as a lucrative canvas for him to build on and sell, as if he were building a village of his own, as represented by the model. And lastly, the spider that appears and crawls over the house seems to represent Beetlejuice, poised to haunt the house, waiting patiently for his opportunity to get inside and toy with everyone within. Once the film gets going, the first thing that strikes me is its gentle pacing. I wouldn't go as far as calling it slow, but the story definitely takes its time to unfold, as we gradually learn more about the characters and follow the recently deceased Barbara and Adam as they learn the rules of the supernatural world and find themselves coming into conflict with the Dietz family who have moved into their house. The wacky look of Beetlejuice himself on the poster had led me to expect a more chaotic film, so this pacing was
a surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
The first 15 minutes of the film in particular flow really nicely, taking the time to establish the young married couple, their lives and their deaths, so that by the time they do die and become ghosts, I genuinely cared about what would happen to them next and how they would adapt to their new circumstances. The next thing that surprised me about the film was how little screen time Beetlejuice actually has in it. According to IMDb, he's in the film for 17.5 minutes out of 92, if you want to be precise. He's more of a lingering threat than a main character, looming over the couple as they debate whether or not to summon him, and if so, how to contact him. This actually works really well, with the character's over-the-top nature
I'm an agent of chaos
being most entertaining in small doses. I found him strangely like a cross between Jack Sparrow,
Captain Jack Sparrow,
in the first Pirates of the Caribbean film, in that he's mad, memorable and motivated, but the film isn't really about him, and instead focuses on a young couple whose lives he interferes in. And Godot from the 1953 absurdist play Waiting for Godot, in that he's a title character who the other characters regularly talk about meeting, only for him to hardly ever appear. That last reference might be a bit of a stretch, as Godot never actually turns up at all in the play, but you get the idea. The Wizard of Oz. I should have said The Wizard of Oz. That's a better example. A title character who only appears at the end of the film. Anyway, I'm very curious to see whether the filmmakers managed to resist giving Beetlejuice a larger role in the second film to maintain his effectiveness as a looming background presence, or if the sequel will turn out to be more of a Michael Keaton one-man show. The other thing I'm curious to see in the sequel is whether they tone down the character of Beetlejuice at all to make him more appealing to modern audiences, as he really is a creep in this first film, with madcap antics such as trying to look up Barbara's skirt, and every other skirt he comes across, and trying to force a teenage Lydia to marry him, or if they have the nerve to double down and keep him as villainous as ever in the sequel. Like a lot of 80s films, this film masterfully interweaves comedy with some genuinely dark moments. For example, when Barbara and Adam go to meet their ghostly caseworker, Juno, they discover that her receptionist is a former Miss Argentina who slit her own wrists. This is later referenced by Otho when he makes the joke,
"You know what they say about people who commit suicide? In the afterlife, they become civil servants."
There's even a scene where Lydia writes a suicide note. And speaking of Lydia, her plan to help the Maitlands by agreeing to marry Beetlejuice for some reason made me think of Marty McFly's plan in Back to the Future to help his father by pretending to sexually assault his mother. 80s film characters were so brilliantly weird. The film as a whole is weird enough that it might not be for everyone, but it does typify what I love most about this era of filmmaking. Whatever you think of them, 80s films were so original, creative, and not afraid to experiment, take risks, or break a mould. The worlds that they depicted were also so immersive, because 90% of what you see on the screen was created practically. I particularly love all of the sets, scenery, practical effects, and dead characters in Juno's afterlife office. There's a man who's been immolated, a man with a shrunken head, a man who's been run over, a magician's assistant who's been sawn in half, all set against a backdrop of surreal winding corridors that are clearly painted on a set. It all looks fantastic, and hilarious, and it means that everything the actors interact with is real, even if it's not realistic, which enables them all to give some of their best performances. Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin play the dearly departed couple to perfection. They are sweet, innocent, and earnest, often playing the straight man to the crazier characters, but when the script needs them to be funny, they are really funny. Winona Ryder launched herself into the public consciousness with her role as Lydia, with this proving to be the first of many gothic horror-based roles for her, and she's great at it, especially considering that she was 16 in this film. Jeffrey Jones is reliably hilarious as the ambitious but exasperated Charles Dietz, trying to maintain a frail grip on his sanity while his wife threatens to exacerbate the breakdown he's going through. Ever since I first saw him as Principal Rooney in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, I can't help but smile every time I see him on screen. His attempts to hold on to his marbles are perhaps best exemplified by the office he protects as his calming oasis in the house, which he won't let anyone change in any way, to the point where there's still a wedding photo of the now deceased previous owners in the room, to which he is seemingly oblivious. Catherine O'Hara and Glenn Shadix make a great duo as the fruity, attention-seeking artist Delia and her camp interior designer and amateur occultist best friend Otho, who is dutifully trying to help her adapt to life in the sticks. And of course, Michael Keaton. Holy moly, what an electric performance. His larger-than-life presence is what makes the character of Beetlejuice function so effectively as a looming threat, even with so little screen time. Every movement he makes, every syllable he utters is wild, and you can't take your eyes off him for a second when he's on screen. Batman fans were famously outraged when Tim Burton cast Michael Keaton as his Batman off the back of this film, and seeing his performance as Beetlejuice, I can understand why. How Tim Burton could tell that this off-the-wall comedian would make a good Batman, I will never know. Keaton's in good company taking on this challenge though, as many actors who ended up giving iconic performances caused fan outrage with their initial casting, especially Batman actors. Ben Affleck and Robert Pattinson would go through the same thing with their versions of Batman. Heath Ledger went through it when he was cast as the Joker, and Daniel Craig went through it when he took over the mantle of James Bond. As a side note, who would have predicted back in 1989 that Keaton would end up playing Batman and Beetlejuice again within the space of a year in 2023 and 2024? Either it's a very weird coincidence, or Hollywood really is out of ideas. But either way, more Michael Keaton is always a good thing. And a strange piece of trivia about Michael Keaton that I stumbled on while researching this video. Would you believe his real name is Michael Douglas? He adopted Keaton as a stage name in the 70s to avoid being confused with, well, Michael Douglas. So that's Beetlejuice, an enduring 80s classic that's well worth a watch, especially if you appreciate practical effects and gothic horror comedy. I'm looking forward to seeing how the sequel compares. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Keep an eye out for my next video. It will probably be a review of Beetlejuice 2. And in the meantime, if you have any thoughts about this first Beetlejuice film that you'd like to share, please drop something down in the comments. Whether you agree with my thoughts, disagree, or want to call out an interesting point that I missed. Because this film has no shortage of brilliant details to comment on. And ultimately, you will have your own relationship with this movie. I am just a third reel.